Chapter 1. Is the wolf more free than the man? There is a question that waits for you in the quietest hours, in that space between one breath and the next, when the masks you've worn all day are laid aside. It is a question that the firelight dances to, and the night wind hums. What if the rules you follow, the goodness you strive for, are not a path to freedom, but the very walls of a cage? What if the man who seems to have everything is, in truth, a prisoner of the very stage upon which he performs? Tonight, let us consider a different kind of freedom. Not the freedom of the flock, safe in their pasture, but the freedom of the wolf, alone on the ridge. Picture him, if you will. His world is not one of promises, but of realities. The cold rock beneath his paws, the scent of prey on the wind, the moon, a silent, unblinking witness. He does not apologize for his nature. He does not seek permission to be hungry. His power is not borrowed. It is his own, forged in the hunt, tested in the winter, confirmed with every breath he takes. He is feared, and in that fear, he finds a terrible, uncomplicated sovereignty. Now picture a different study. Not yours, not mine, but one from 500 years ago. The air is cold, the stone floor leaching the warmth from your feet. A single candle throws long dancing shadows against the wall, and at a heavy wooden desk, a man sits, the ghost of ink staining his fingers. This is Niccolò Machiavelli, exiled, disgraced, and dreaming of princes. He dips his quill, and he begins to write not of how men ought to live, but of how they do live. He is drawing a map of the real world, a world he has seen drenched in the blood of betrayal and the glitter of false crowns. He understood the cage. He saw how men builded around themselves with pretty words and noble intentions, all while the ruthless, the wolf-like, take what they will. He wrote that a ruler, and you can read that as any man who wishes to have agency in his own life, must learn to act like a beast. He must be a fox to recognize the traps, and a lion to terrify the wolves. This is not a call to cruelty for its own sake. That is a childish misunderstanding. This is a call to awareness. It is the quiet, chilling realization that the world is not a court of appeals, where you can plead your case with virtue. It is a forest, with its own laws, and if you walk through it bleating about fairness, you will be heard, and then you will be eaten. The freedom of the wolf is not a freedom from consequence. It is a freedom from illusion. It is the burden of seeing the game for what it is, and choosing, with clear eyes, how you will play. The man who is bound by a morality no one else respects is not good. He is a slave to an idea, and his master is the first man to disabuse him of it. Can you feel the weight of that? The creak of the cage door, opening just a crack? To step through is to leave something behind, the warm, simple faith that goodness will be rewarded. It is a kind of innocence, and to lose it is a small death. But what is born from that death? A different kind of man. A man who can look another in the eye and see not a soul but a will. A man who understands that a promise is only as strong as the consequence of breaking it. A man who knows that sometimes, to protect the garden, you must be willing to walk into the woods and get your hands dirty. This is the first, the most unsettling lesson from that cold Florentine study. That the freedom you crave might require a strength you have been taught to call a sin. And the question that remains, hanging in the air long after the candle has guttered out, is this: is it better to be a good man in a cage of your own making, or a free one, standing alone under a vast and starry sky, with the scent of the hunt upon you? The night deepens around us, and the first story settles in the room like dust motes in moonlight. It asks us to look outward at the structure of the world. But power is not merely an external force, is it? It has an inner geography, a shadowed landscape within every soul. And so we turn our gaze inward, to a quieter, more intimate theater of war. Chapter 2. What lives in the space between a promise and a lie? Listen. Can you hear it? Beneath the hum of the world, beneath the traffic and the chatter, there is a quieter sound. It is the sound of a story being told, not to a crowd but to one person in a dimly lit room. It is a story you are telling yourself, about who you are, about what you deserve, about the man you have been, and the man you might yet become. This story, is it a promise, or is it a lie? This is the most intimate territory of power, not the power you wield over others, but the power that others wield over you through the stories you choose to believe. Machiavelli, that sharp-eyed observer of the human comedy, spent less time on this inner world, but his principles cast a long shadow here too. He knew that perception is the greater part of reality, that a prince must be a great storyteller, must appear to be all virtues, even if he cannot possess them all. He was talking about politics, of course. But what is your life, if not a small, private principality that you are struggling to govern? Think of the last time you felt a knot of fear in your stomach, before a difficult conversation, when facing a risk. What was the story you told yourself? I am not the kind of man who can do this. They will see through me. I will be exposed. This is a story of weakness, a self-administered poison. It is a lie you have come to believe because it is comfortable, because it excuses you from the arena. Now consider the opposite. The man who walks into a room, not with bluster, but with a quiet certainty. He is telling himself a different story, a story of capability, of resilience. It may not be entirely true, not yet, but he wears it, he performs it, and in the performing, he begins to inhabit it. The story becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is the fox's cunning turned inward. It is not about deceiving others, but about strategically editing the narrative of the self. It is about choosing the lie that serves you until it ripens into a truth. This is a dangerous idea, I know. It feels like a betrayal of that sacred command, to thine own self be true. But I ask you, to which self? To the fearful boy who still lives in you? Or to the king you have the potential to become? Machiavelli would ask, which version of you is more likely to secure your legacy, to protect what you love, to navigate the storms of fate? There is a profound weight to this. The realization that your inner world is not a fixed kingdom, but a contested one. That the throne of your own mind is fought over by the stories of your past failures and the promises of your future strength. Every moment of doubt is a coup attempt. Every act of courage is a loyalist force reclaiming the capital. To master this inner principality, you must become its shrewd sovereign. You must audit the stories. You must banish the tales that weaken you, the narratives of victimhood and limitation. They are the courtiers who whisper poison in your ear, selling you a comfortable decline. And you must sponsor the stories that fortify you, even if they feel at first like fictions. You must invest in the narrative of your own strength, your own resourcefulness, your own worth. What is lost if you ignore this? You remain a subject in your own life, ruled by the ghosts of old wounds and the fears of a timid heart. You live in the space between a promise you never made to yourself and a lie you accepted without question. but what is gained if you embrace it? A quiet, unshakable authority that no external failure can ever truly touch. You become the author of your own life, the teller of your own tale. And in the end, the most profound power you will ever hold is the power to decide what story you will believe right now in the dark before you drift into sleep. Is it a story of limitation, or is it a story of a king resting before the battles of a new day? The outer game of the wolf, the inner game of the storyteller. They lead us inevitably to the final and most haunting question, the one that waits at the end of all ambition in the silent room when the last guest has departed and the lights are dimmed. It is a question not of how to live or how to rule, but of what remains when the living and the ruling are done. Chapter 3. What is the true cost of an untouched crown? Every man, in some quiet corner of his soul, has dreamed of a crown, not necessarily of gold and jewels, but of a different metal, the solid, cold weight of legacy, the respect of his peers, the security of his family. A name that means something, a life that mattered. We are builders, weavers of our own tapestries, hoping to leave behind something that will not be entirely erased by the indifferent tide of time. But tonight, I want you to consider a different image, not the crown gleaming and untouched placed upon a velvet pillow. I want you to consider the hands that would hold it. Are they clean, or are they stained? Machiavelli's most famous, most chilling line is that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. We hear this and we think of thrones, of armies, of statecraft. But let us bring it home, to your office, to your family, to your own heart. To be loved is to be followed for who you are. To be feared is to be followed for what you can do. The love of your children is one thing. The respect of your competitors is another. The affection of your friends is a gentle warmth. The certainty that your word is your bond and that a broken promise carries a consequence is a different kind of heat altogether. The prince, Machiavelli wrote, must be willing to make a few examples, to be cruel in a single decisive act in order to prevent a long, slow decay of disorder that hurts everyone. He was talking about the body politic. But what about the body of your own life? Have you ever had to be cruel to be kind? To fire a loyal but incompetent employee to save the business that feeds 10 others? To end a relationship that was a slow poison? To set a hard boundary with someone you care for because to be soft was to enable their downfall? These are the small, private cruelties that a man of substance must sometimes administer. They stain the hands. They cost you a little of your own idea of yourself as a good man. This is the true cost of the crown. It is not the effort, the long nights, the stress. Those are just the price of admission. The real cost is moral. It is the pristine innocence you must sacrifice. It is the willingness to carry the weight of a difficult decision, to accept the hatred or the misunderstanding of others, to be the villain in someone else's story so that your own story can have the ending you require. Now imagine the alternative, the untouched crown, the life of pure principle where your hands are always clean. You never made the hard call. You never broke a heart to save a future. You never told a necessary lie. You were good and kind and ineffective. Your legacy is a whisper, a tapestry woven of thin, fragile thread, easily torn by the first strong wind. Your principality is small because you refuse to fight for more. Your story is safe, and it is forgotten before the ink is dry. So we arrive at the final sobering calculation. A life of impact, of legacy, of a crown that has weight, is a life that Byron comes with moral stains. It is a life that has traded some measure of innocence for a measure of power. And a life of pristine innocence is often a life of quiet irrelevance. A crown that was never worn, never risked, never tarnished, and therefore never truly earned. Which is the greater poverty? To have stained hands and a legacy that endures, or to have clean hands and a name that the wind carries away? There is no easy answer. There is only the choice, and the recognition that every man makes it every day in 1,000 small ways. The crown is always there, waiting, gleaming, cold and heavy, with the price you must decide, in the deepest silence of your own soul, whether you are willing to pay. The fire has burned low now. The whispers from that Florentine study have faded, leaving only their echoes in the quiet of your own mind. We have walked through the forest with the wolf, governed the inner principality of the self, and held the cold, heavy weight of a crown. There are no more lessons to be drawn, no more maps to be read, only the soft, slow rhythm of your breath and the gentle release of the day's grip. Let these ideas drift away now, like leaves on a dark stream. They have been planted. They will wait for you in the stillness of your tomorrow, ready to surface when you need them. For now, there is only the comfort of the dark, the warmth of your rest, and the quiet, sovereign peace of a mind at ease. Sleep. Chapter 4. What if the greatest deception is the one you tell yourself? Close your eyes now, and let the day's stubborn grip begin to loosen. The lists you made, the arguments you rehearsed in your mind, the constant low hum of performance. Let it all soften and fade into the background. Tonight, we step into a different kind of room, a quieter one. The air here is still and smells of old paper, of drying ink, and of the cold stone of a fireplace that has long since grown dark. We are here to sit with a ghost, not a frightening one, but a thoughtful one. A man in exile, his fingers stained from writing, his mind a tangled knot of power and fear, and the beautiful, terrible lies that hold civilizations together. Niccolò Machiavelli. And as we sit with him in this quiet, we aren't here to judge him or to praise him. We are here to listen, to hear the questions his life asks of ours. The first one is perhaps the most intimate, the most personal. It is a question that doesn't roar from a throne, but one that whispers to you in the mirror. Last thing at night. Think of the stories you tell yourself just to get through the day, the little fictions, that you are in control, that you are a good person always, that your motivations are pure, your heart is clean, your hands are spotless. We build these elegant, fragile palaces of self-regard, and we live inside them, and we call it our character. But what Machiavelli saw in the brutal, beautiful chess game of Renaissance Florence was that the most dangerous liar is not the one who stands before you and speaks falsehoods. It is the one who lives inside you and convinces you that your desires are noble, that your compromises are necessary, that your fear is really prudence. He watched men of God cloak their ambition in Scripture. He watched Republicans sell their liberty for the illusion of safety. He saw, time and again, that the first kingdom a prince must conquer is not the one beyond his walls, but the one within his own skull, the kingdom of his own self-deception. Picture him now, not as a statue, but as a man, banished from the city he loved, forced to retire to a small farm outside Florence. His days of influence are over. The political battles, the diplomatic missions, the secret memos, all gone. And in the crushing silence of his exile, he sits down at a simple wooden desk. The chair creaks. The only light is a single guttering candle, its flame dancing nervously, casting long, trembling shadows that look like accusing fingers on the walls. He takes up a quill, he dips it in ink, and he begins to write a letter to a prince he has never met, about a power he will never hold again. This act itself, is it not a form of self-deception? A man with no power writing the ultimate book on power. A man who failed in the real world of politics, creating a perfect, imaginary one in a manuscript. He is convincing himself that his mind still matters, that his voice can still echo in the halls of princes, even if his body is trapped in the countryside. He is deceiving himself into believing he is still a player in the game, and not just its most brilliant and most heartbroken spectator. And as you listen to the soft scratch of that quill in your mind, ask yourself, where are you in your own life, the exiled prince? Where have you told yourself a story about why you cannot have what you want, or why you must settle for what you have? We tell ourselves we are not ambitious, when the truth is, we are afraid of the competition. We tell ourselves we are protecting our families by staying in a soul-deadening job, when the truth is, we are terrified of the uncertainty of freedom. We tell ourselves that our anger is righteous, when it is merely the sputtering of a wounded ego. These are the deceptions that cost us not our thrones, but our souls. They are the quiet, daily compromises that, over a lifetime, build a prison whose walls are made of our own excuses. Machiavelli would have recognized them instantly. He spent his life studying the cost of such illusions on the grand stage of history. He saw kingdoms fall because a king believed his own propaganda, because he thought he was loved when he was only feared, or because he thought he was feared when he was only despised. The candle flame flickers, a draft from under the door. The shadow of the writer hunches over the page. He is not writing a horror story. He is writing a love letter to power, a desperate, broken love letter from a man who has been spurned by his beloved. And in every cold, calculated word, it is better to be feared than loved. The ends justify the means. There is a hidden, unspoken plea. See me, hear my wisdom, bring me back from this exile. This is the core of the self-deception, the belief that if he can just be clever enough, ruthless enough, understood enough, he can win back his place in the world. He does not see that the world has already moved on, that the game has changed. And so he writes and he writes, weaving a spell of stark, unsentimental realism that is, at its very heart, a profound and tragic fantasy, a fantasy of control, of a world where human nature is a simple, predictable mechanism, and if you just learn the levers, you can master it all. But the night is long, and the candle is burning low. And as the first question settles into the quiet soil of your mind, another one begins to form. It's a heavier question, one that carries the weight of a sword and the fragility of a human heart. So we sit with this truth. The lies we tell ourselves are the foundations of our own private fortresses. And from within those walls, we look out at the world and we see the instruments of power. We see the ability to command, to influence, to bend reality to our will. And a deeper, more troubling question begins to surface, not from the mind, but from the conscience. It's a question for every good man who has ever been handed responsibility, for every gentle soul who has ever had to make a hard choice that hurt someone else. Chapter 5. Can a good man wield a terrible power without becoming it? Imagine a perfectly balanced sword, its blade cold forged from necessity, its hilt wrapped in the leather of good intentions. It is a heavy thing, a responsible thing. It is the power to hire and fire, to declare war, to pass a sentence, to make a cut in the budget that saves a company but ends 100 livelihoods. This is the power Machiavelli describes. It is not a gentle power. It is a terrible power. It is the power to break things and people for a larger, more abstract goal, the reason of state, the greater good. And the ancient, haunting question is this: when a good man picks up that sword, does he remain the man who holds it? Or does the coldness of the steel slowly seep into his palm, travel up his arm, and settle in his heart? Does the weight of the weapon change the posture of his very soul? Machiavelli, in his exile, is trying to answer this. He is not, as he is so often painted, a monster celebrating monstrosity. He is a doctor, dissecting a corpse. The corpse is the Florentine Republic. And his report is a cold, clinical list of all the diseases that killed it. Indecision, weakness, a foolish reliance on hope, a sentimental attachment to goodness when ruthlessness was required. He is saying, look, this is the world. It is a forest full of predators and prey. To be the shepherd, you must sometimes do the work of the wolf. But here is the part he whispers, the part we often miss in the roar of his more famous quotes. The transformation is the cost. The good man, to protect his flock, must learn to snarl. He must learn to hunt in the dark. He must feel the thrill of the chase. And one night, he may look at his reflection in a moonlit stream and see, not the shepherd, but the yellow eyes of the wolf staring back. The power has not just been wielded, it has performed a kind of alchemy on the wielder. Can you feel the texture of that transformation? It is not a sudden, dramatic fall from grace. It is a slow, subtle seasoning. It is the first time you make a decision that is just business, and you feel a twinge of conscience, but you silence it with the logic of necessity. It is the second time when the twinge is fainter. It is the 100th time when the logic is now your native tongue, and the voice of conscience speaks a language you can barely remember. This is the true prince. Not a manual for tyrants, but a tragic play in 3 acts about a man who sets out to save his city and ends up sacrificing his own humanity to do it. The power becomes a drug, and the initial high of efficacy of getting things done slowly adds the soul to its own potency. The man who once sought power to do good now does good to maintain his power. The ends and the means have become a tangled, inseparable knot. And in the silence of your own life, you have held smaller versions of this sword: the power to end a relationship, the power to dismiss an idea, the power to silence a voice. And you have felt that subtle, chilling shift. The moment when being right became more important than being kind. The moment when winning the argument cost you a piece of your compassion. This is the Machiavellian dilemma, scaled down to the human level. It is the eternal question of integrity. Can you touch the tar without becoming stained? Can you stare into the abyss, as Nietzsche would later warn, without the abyss staring back into you? There is no easy answer, only the quiet, personal audit at the end of the day, in the dim light of your own conscience. The question is not whether you wield power, we all do, in our small kingdoms. The question is what the wielding of it is doing to the one who holds the hilt. But this is a heavy thought. The weight of the crown, the cold of the steel. It makes one wonder about the weight of the head that bears it, the hand that holds it. It makes one wonder about the moments we never see, the moments behind the throne, away from the admiring crowds and the fearful courtiers, the moments of utter solitude. Which brings us to our final question for the night, the most vulnerable of all. A question that Machiavelli himself could never answer in his writings, but one that his life, his exile, his lonely vigil at that small desk asks on his behalf. It is a question that strips away all the strategy, all the manipulation, all the cold calculus of power, and asks, what remains of the man when the performance is over? Chapter 6. Where does a prince go to weep? Every leader, every person of responsibility wears a mask of certainty, of unshakable resolve, of imperturbable calm. This is the persona, the Latin word for the mask worn by actors on a stage. Machiavelli's entire philosophy is a lesson in crafting the perfect mask. The prince must appear merciful, faithful, humane, religious, and upright, he writes. He must appear. The true self, with its doubts, its fears, and its private sorrows, must remain hidden, a secret locked in a room deep within the castle. For if the people see the prince weep, they will see him as weak. If his enemies see him doubt, they will see an opportunity. So the mask must be fixed and flawless. But the man beneath it is human. He feels the weight of a decision that sent young men to their deaths. He feels the loneliness of a truth he can share with no one. He feels the corrosive acid of a betrayal, or the quiet shame of a promise he had to break for the greater good. So where does he go? Where is the room, the hidden soundproofed chamber in the architecture of power, where the prince can set down his crown, let the mask crumble, and simply weep? For Machiavelli, that place was his small study on his farm. His exile was, in a terrible way, his weeping room. It was the place where the mask of the influential diplomat and political theorist was forcibly removed, revealing the heartbroken, forgotten man beneath. And in that space, he did not weep tears. He wept ink. The prince is his tear-stained manuscript. Its coldness is the inverse of his own hot, suppressed passion for Florence. Its ruthless logic is the reaction against his own romantic heart that loved his city too much. When he writes that a ruler must learn how not to be good, he is screaming in the silent language of prose about the goodness he saw crushed by the realities of politics. The entire book is a testament to a pain so profound that it could only be expressed as its opposite. We all have our own versions of this chamber, don't we? The car, parked in the garage after a long day. The shower, where the water muffles the sound. The walk around the block in the deep of night. These are the places where we, the princes of our own small domains, our families, our teams, our own fragile esteem, allow the mask to slip, where we let the fear, the disappointment, the exhaustion, and the simple human need to be vulnerable finally surface. This is the ultimate unspoken truth in Machiavelli's work. The immense, tragic loneliness of command. The isolation that is the true price of power. To be the one who decides is to be the one who must ultimately stand alone with the consequences of that decision. There are no advisors in that moment, no counsel, no friends. There is only you, and the silence and the weight of what you have done, or what you must do. So, as you drift now, let go of the prince you feel you must be tomorrow. Let go of the mask you will have to wear. There is no audience here in the dark, no one to judge your resolve. You can set down the crown. You can let the steel of your composure soften In this quiet, you are not a ruler, not a strategist, not a deceiver or the deceived. You are simply a soul, adrift in the vast and beautiful human experience, listening to the whisper of history and the softer, more forgiving whisper of the night. The questions have been asked. They do not need answers tonight. They only need to be felt. Let them settle. Let them be. And allow yourself the profound, necessary peace of a temporary exile from your own power. Chapter 7. What silence does the crown truly hear? There is a silence that comes before the storm, and a silence that comes after. But the silence I want to invite you into tonight is of a different kind altogether. It is the silence that surrounds a throne, not the noisy public silence of subjects holding their breath, but the private, echoing silence that the ruler himself must listen to, alone in his chambers, when the last advisor has left and the candles are guttering low. This is the silence that tells the truth. This is the silence that measures the weight of the crown not in gold but in solitude. What if the ultimate price of power is not what you must do to others, but what you must become within yourself? What if the most critical intelligence a leader can possess is not about reading the battlefield or the treasury ledger, but about interpreting that vast inner quiet? This is where we begin our journey tonight, not with a shout or a decree or a public triumph, but with a whisper from the deepest chamber of a lonely, fortressed heart. Imagine him for a moment. Not the stern portrait from the history books, but a man. A man sitting in a small, lamplit room in the Italian countryside, exiled from the city he loved, from the political whirlwind that was his life's blood. The night outside is absolute. The only sound is the scratch of his quill, like a faint heartbeat in the stillness. This is Niccolò Machiavelli, writing a letter to a prince he would never truly know, crafting a manual for power from a position of utter powerlessness. And in that act, there is a profound and aching irony. He is mapping the anatomy of the lion from the quiet desperation of the fox's den. He is describing the view from the mountain peak while sitting in a darkened valley. And so his work is not, as many assume, a cold-blooded celebration of control. It is a lament. It is a ghost story told by the ghost himself. He understood that to command the noise of the world, the clamor of the court, the roar of the mob, the clash of armies, one must first master the silence within the self. A ruler, he knew, must build an inner citadel, a place of such profound quiet that the cacophony of flattery, of threat, of desperation cannot penetrate. In this silence, he must hear the faint, telltale heartbeat of a conspiracy. In this silence, he must discern the almost imperceptible shift in the wind of public favor. He must listen for the things that are not being said, the unwhispered secret, the withheld complaint, the gratitude that is a little too sharp, a little too bright to be real. This is the core of it. The crown is not a megaphone. It is an ear trumpet, amplifying the most subtle and dangerous of sounds, the sound of what is missing. Think of the sensory world of such a man, the weight of the velvet robe, not as a comfort, but as a shroud, the cool, smooth surface of the marble balustrade as he looks down upon a city that sleeps, or pretends to sleep, the taste of the wine, tested for poison, now carrying the faint metallic ghost of that fear. This is the reality behind the pomp. It is a life lived in a state of heightened, perpetual interpretation. Every face is a text to be read. Every oath is a code to be cracked. And in the center of it all, the ruler must cultivate his own silence, He must learn to speak less, to reveal nothing, to become a closed door, behind which his true intentions can grow and change in the dark, like roots. To be predictable is to be vulnerable. To be an open book is to give your enemies your battle plans. So, he builds a fortress of quiet around his own heart. And what is the cost of this? What is the toll extracted for this constant, vigilant listening? It is a slow, steady erosion of a certain kind of trust. The trust that lets a man relax his shoulders in company. The trust that allows for an unguarded laugh. The trust that makes friendship possible. Machiavelli's prince cannot afford such luxuries. His relationships are not bonds of the heart. They are alliances of the moment. His affections are not given. They are strategically deployed. And so, the very silence he cultivates for protection becomes, over time, his prison. The walls of his inner citadel grow so high and so thick that no genuine human connection can scale them. He becomes the sole occupant of his own magnificent, echoing solitude. This is the silent trade. This is the transaction at the heart of dark power. You gain the obedience of the multitude, but you lose the comfort of a single, true companion. You learn to hear the secrets of the world, but you become deaf to the simple, uncalculated melodies of human warmth. The crown hears everything, and in doing so, it makes the man beneath it utterly, profoundly alone. It hears the silence of its own making, and in the dead of night, that silence can become a roaring in the ears, a vacuum that threatens to swallow the soul whole. The ultimate deception, then, may not be the one the prince practices upon his people, but the one he must practice upon his own humanity, convincing himself that this magnificent isolation is not a form of living death. He becomes the warden of his own soul, listening, always listening, for a key and a lock that he himself has thrown away. The image of that solitary ruler fades now, like a portrait left in the sun. But the question it raises lingers in the air, as tangible as the cool side of the pillow. It leads us, inevitably, from the silence one must cultivate, to the very specific, very deliberate sound one must learn to make in the world, the sound of fear. Chapter 8. Is fear a fortress or a tomb? It is one of the most misunderstood, most stripped from its context ideas in all of political thought. Machiavelli's cold, clear choice. It is better to be feared than loved. We hear it, and we think of tyranny, of cruelty, of dungeons, and executioners' axes. But what if we have been hearing it wrong all this time? What if Machiavelli was not prescribing a preference, but describing a mechanism, as a watchmaker might describe the tension of a spring? What if this isn't about what is better in a moral sense, but about what is more reliable in a broken, unpredictable world, and the deeper, more personal question that slumbers beneath it all? Can the fortress you build from the fear of others ever become your own tomb? Think of fear not as an emotion, but as a material, a substance like stone or timber. It has properties. It has tensile strength. It can be quarried, shaped, and mortared into a structure of authority. Love. Love is a vapor. It is a morning mist that is beautiful to behold, that softens the edges of the world, but which vanishes at the first touch of the sun of hardship, of scarcity, of self-interest. Love is voluntary. It is given, and it can be taken away. But fear is compulsory. It is a reaction, a primal animal instinct that bypasses reason. It is, in its own dark way, a perversion of respect. It is the acknowledgement of a consequence that is too certain, too terrible, to risk inviting. Machiavelli, from his exile, was observing a brutal, practical calculus. A leader sustained by love must constantly feed that love with benevolence, with gifts, with a perpetual demonstration of virtue. His power is contingent, forever at the mercy of his people's fickle affections. But a leader sustained by fear, his work is done in the moment the fear is established. The walls of his fortress are built in the minds of his subjects. They hold themselves in check. They police their own actions, their own thoughts, glancing always at the shadow of the possible punishment. It is a far more efficient system of control. It allows the ruler to rest, to tend to other matters, for the fortress of fear maintains itself. It requires no upkeep of gratitude, only the occasional terrible demonstration of its reality to remind everyone that the walls are still there and that they are very, very high. But let us walk inside this fortress. Let us feel its atmosphere. The stones are cold, for they have never been warmed by the sun of genuine affection. The corridors are empty, save for the echoes of your own footsteps. There are no gatherings here, no shared laughter, no trust. There are only sentries and servants, their eyes downcast, their loyalty purchased by their own fear. This is the ruler's home. This is the world he has built. And the critical, unspoken truth is that he is as much a prisoner within it as anyone outside of it. He cannot leave its walls, for beyond them he is not loved, he is only hated, and the object of hatred is always eventually a target. His freedom is an illusion, his power is a cage, and the material of fear is treacherous. It is not like stone, stable and enduring. It is more like ice. It can seem formidable, impenetrable, a sheer cliff face of dread. But it has a melting point. It can be turned, suddenly and catastrophically, into a raging flood of hatred and rebellion. Fear suppresses action, but it does not eliminate resentment. It packs that resentment down, layer upon layer, compressing it into a diamond-hard core of fury. And one day, a crack appears. A moment of perceived weakness. A single voice, brave or desperate enough to shout into the silence. And the entire frozen structure can shatter, releasing a torrent that will sweep the architect away forever. The fortress, in the end, becomes a tomb, sealed from the outside by the very forces he sought to control. Machiavelli knew this. He was not a fool. He understood the volatility of his chosen material. This is why he added his crucial, often ignored caveat. A prince must be careful not to be hated. He must administer his fear with a surgeon's precision, not a butcher's abandon. He must be severe, but not capricious. He must be just enough in his punishments that they feel deserved, even to those who fear him. He must make the fortress walls seem like a necessary, if grim, feature of the landscape, a protection from external chaos, rather than a purely internal instrument of torture. It is a dizzily difficult balancing act. To wield fear without being consumed by the hatred it breeds is to walk a razor's edge over an abyss. Most who try it fall. The fortress, for all its imposing strength, is built on a foundation of perpetual anxiety, the ruler's own. He must live every day knowing that the very substance of his power is the same substance that could, at any moment, become the instrument of his utter destruction. And so we find ourselves at the final, most intimate question, a question that moves from the structures of power to the soul of the one who blueprinted them, from the fortress to the architect who must now live in its basement, surrounded by the cold machinery of his own creation. Chapter 9. Must the architect of power live in the basement of his own design? We have spoken of the silence of the crown and the cold architecture of fear, but these are merely the outputs, the visible creations of a particular kind of mind. What of the mind itself? What of the man who, like Machiavelli, dedicates his life to understanding the levers and pulleys that move human beings, who draws the blueprints for control? There is a haunting, inevitable consequence to this pursuit. When you spend your life studying the anatomy of the snake, does its venom begin to course in your own veins? When you design a machine that runs on cunning and calculation, can you ever again live in the sunlight of innocence? Or is the ultimate, unspoken price of this knowledge that you must forever reside in the dark, cramped, functional basement of the palace you designed, surrounded by the gritty, grinding gears of human nature, while others dance in the lighted halls above? Machiavelli, the man, is our perfect guide into this gloom. He was not a prince. He was a functionary, a diplomat, a scholar. His power was intellectual, not political. He was the architect, not the king. And after his fall from grace, after his exile, he became the full-time cartographer of a territory from which he was permanently banished. Every evening he would retire to his study. He would put on his formal robes, the robes of a Florentine official, now utterly meaningless, and he would commune with the ancient minds of Rome. And then he would write. He would design perfect systems of governance, perfect strategies of statecraft, all from a position of complete and utter irrelevance. He was building palaces in his mind while living in a modest farmhouse. He was a master chef, writing elaborate recipes for a feast he would never taste. This is the basement. It is the space of the theorist, the advisor, the ghostwriter of power. It is a place of profound understanding, but also of profound powerlessness. The architect knows every secret passage, every load-bearing wall, every weakness in the foundation. But he does not get to decide which portraits hang in the gallery. He does not feel the warmth of the hearth in the great hall. His world is one of diagrams and drafts, of ink and parchment. It is a world devoid of the messy, glorious, unpredictable humanity that his designs are meant to control. And in that separation, a slow, subtle poison can seep in. The architect begins to see people not as souls, but as components, not as beings with hopes and fears, but as pieces on a chessboard, to be moved, sacrificed, or leveraged for a greater strategic end. His compassion atrophies. His cynicism becomes his comfort. The great tragic joke is that the architect, in his quest to understand power, often renders himself unfit to ever truly wield it. He becomes too aware of the strings. He sees the manipulation behind every gracious gesture, the self-interest behind every oath of loyalty. He could no more simply be a leader, feeling the uncalculated swell of connection with his people, than a watchmaker could simply look at a sundial and tell the time. His knowledge has deconstructed the magic. He has seen the wires in the mirrors. And so he is condemned to his basement, his brilliant mind whirring away in the dark, creating systems that others, less burdened by knowledge, will use to rule the world. He trades the experience of life for the blueprint of it. He gains a godlike understanding of the engine of society, but loses the ability to simply ride in the car and feel the wind on his face. And this, perhaps, is the most personal lesson Machiavelli leaves for us, not in his book, but in the silhouette of his life. The pursuit of dark knowledge darkens the knower. To immerse oneself in the mechanics of fear, deception, and power is to build a home in the shadows, You may come to understand everything about how the world works, but you will forget what it feels like to be a part of it. You will live in the basement of your own intellect, listening to the footsteps of others living their lives on the floors above. Lives of simple faith, of unguarded love, of trust that you now know to be naive, but which you cannot help but miss, like a flavor from a childhood you can never reclaim. The final and most terrible deception is that in mastering the art of control, you lose control of your own capacity for lightness, for joy, for the uncalculated, unforced, and beautifully ordinary grace of being merely human. The architect is the ghost in his own machine, a whisper of intellect in the basement of a palace he built for a king, forever listening to the music of a ball he is too wise and too wounded to ever attend. Let that thought drift now, not as a burden, but as a release. The understanding of these dark mechanics is not a call to employ them, but a vaccination against them. To see the gears is to be free of their hypnotic turn. To know the price of the crown is to find peace in its absence. And in that peace, in the quiet of your own mind, unburdened by the need to rule or to deceive, you can simply rest. The night is deep. The world turns without your command, and that is its own profound and gentle kind of power. Let it carry you now into sleep. Close your eyes now and let the day's trivial concerns, its small politics and minor deceptions, simply dissolve into the darkness around you. What we are about to do is not study. It is not a lesson. It is a visitation. We are going to sit, you and I, in the quiet study of a man who has been dead for 500 years, and listen to the echoes his questions left behind. We are going to speak of power and fear and the stories we tell to keep the darkness at bay. But we will speak of them softly, as one speaks of deep things near the edge of sleep. So let your breath slow, and let us begin with the first, the most silent of all questions. Chapter 10. What is the weight of a shadow? Have you ever considered the substance of a shadow? It has no mass, you might say. You cannot hold it in your hand. And yet, stand in a vast, empty hall, with a single candle burning, and tell me you do not feel the presence of the shadows in the corners. They have a density, a chill. They are not mere absences of light. They are active participants in the room. This is the true currency of the prince, the ruler, the man who holds the levers of power. It is not the gold in the treasury, nor the steel of the guard's swords. It is the shadow he casts. And every shadow has a weight, a cumulative gravity. Think of it not as a thing, but as a residue of every difficult choice, every necessary cruelty, every public smile that masked a private grimace. Machiavelli, in his lonely exile, his quill scratching by a solitary flame, understood this better than anyone. He was not, as some would have you believe, a simple champion of cruelty. He was a cartographer of shadows. He was mapping the cost. Imagine him there. The fire is low. The night is quiet outside his small farmhouse. The political world of Florence, the world he loved and lost, is going on without him. And he picks up his pen. He is not writing a manifesto of evil. He is writing a love letter to power. A heartbreaking one, from a man who has been jilted by it. He is trying to understand the anatomy of control, and he concludes that it is better for a ruler to be feared than loved, if he cannot be both. But have you ever sat with why? Truly, why? It is not because fear is stronger than love. In a moment, it can be, but because fear is predictable. Love is a wild, untamed thing. It can flare and it can fade. It can be capricious. But fear is a slow, steady burn. It is a shadow that follows the prince everywhere, and in doing so, it extends his presence into every alley, every tavern, every private home. When his subjects are alone in their beds, wondering if they should cheat on their taxes or speak ill of their ruler, it is not the memory of his kindness that stays their hand. It is the weight of his shadow, the certainty of the consequence. But here is the truth that whispers to us from Machiavelli's own life, from his own exile, that shadow does not only fall upon the people, it falls inward. The prince must live inside his own shadow. He breathes its air. He is chilled by its temperature. The weight of it settles upon his own shoulders until the public face and the private man become two different creatures, living in a silent, permanent tension. The crown is not a piece of jewelry. It is a machine for casting a specific, terrifying shadow, and the man who wears it must contort himself every hour of every day to serve that machine. So, what is the weight of a shadow? It is the weight of 1,000 silenced doubts. It is the weight of a heart that has learned to beat in a calculated rhythm rather than a spontaneous one. It is the weight of a soul that has become a tenant in its own body, living in the rooms that the crown has not demanded for its own use. It is a profound, echoing loneliness. The prince, for all his apparent power, is the most isolated man in the kingdom. He is trapped in the very instrument of his control. And as you drift towards sleep, ask yourself, in the quiet theater of your own mind, in your own life, in your own smaller kingdoms of office and home and heart, what shadows do you cast, and what do they cost you to maintain? Feel the gravity of that thought, and then for a moment, let it go. Let it dissolve into the dark. There is more to hear, but for now, just rest. The night deepens around us, and the fire in our imagined study has burned down to embers. The first question was of the external, the shadow cast upon the world. But now, the inquiry turns inward to a more intimate, more unsettling transformation. For the mask one wears for the world, does it over time become the only face there is? Chapter 11. Does the mask eventually kiss the face? It hides? There is an old poetic idea that if you wear a mask for long enough, it will eventually fuse to your skin, that the performance, if sustained with enough conviction, ceases to be a performance at all. It becomes biology. It becomes truth. This is the silent, psychological masterpiece within Machiavelli's work. He is not just advising a prince on how to act. He is describing a process of alchemy, where the artificial self transmutes into the real one. Think of the young ruler, new to his throne. He is perhaps kind, or fearful, or sentimental. He must project strength, ruthlessness, unwavering resolve. So he practices. In the mirror of his chamber, he practices the stern gaze. He rehearses the speech that will condemn a man to death. He schools his features into an impassive mask, because the stability of the state, he believes, depends on this performance. At first, it is a conscious effort, a wait. He takes the mask off at night in his private quarters and feels a relief, a return to a softer self. But then, a crisis comes, a rebellion, a betrayal, and in that moment of sheer, unthinking panic, he does not have time to find the mask and put it on. He must act. And what comes out? Is it the soft, sentimental young man, or is it the stern, ruthless persona he has been rehearsing? More often than not, it is the latter. The neural pathways have been carved. The mask has been practicing too. It has been whispering to the face beneath it, teaching it its ways. Machiavelli, in his desperation to return to Florence, performed the same alchemy upon himself. The witty diplomat, the shrewd political mind, was forced to play the part of the humble country gentleman, writing ribald comedies and tending to his olives. And yet, his letters betray a man whose mind was still entirely in the game of power. The mask of the contented exile never truly fit. It chafed, it itched, because his true face was the face of the political animal. For him, the mask never kissed his face. It was a constant, painful reminder of its absence. But for the successful prince, the one who survives and thrives, the fusion is complete. This is the deep, philosophical horror at the heart of The Prince. It is not a book about how to appear virtuous. It is a book about how, through the disciplined application of action, to become what the state requires, to internalize its logic so completely that the line between the actor and the role simply vanishes. The mercy you once showed naturally becomes a calculation. The love you once felt freely becomes a tool. The face in the mirror is no longer your father's face or your lover's face. It is the face of the state. And so we must ask in the quiet of our own lives, what masks do we wear? The mask of the confident leader, when inside we feel like an imposter? The mask of the calm parent, when inside we are a storm of frustration? The mask of the agreeable colleague when we are screaming with dissent? And have you ever felt one of those masks stick? Have you ever come home from a long day of performing a role and found that the performance lingered? That the patience you forced yourself to exhibit had somehow become a genuine patience? Or that the assertiveness you faked in a meeting had carved a new groove of confidence in your soul? The mask and the face are in a constant, slow dance. Sometimes the mask is a cage. Sometimes it is a teacher. The terrifying, the liberating truth that Machiavelli forces us to confront is that we are all, always, in a process of becoming. We are sculpting ourselves with every action, every feigned emotion, every necessary compromise. The question is not whether we wear a mask. The question is, which one? And who do we become when we finally take it off? Only to find there is nothing left underneath but its impression. Let that thought hang in the air, not as a fear, but as a wonder, a mystery of the self. And now let your mind grow soft and ready for the final turn of this key. A longer pause, the feeling of the night deepening, the embers glowing faintly. We have spoken of the shadow cast outward and the mask fused inward. But there is a third force, the most powerful and the most silent of all. It is the law that is never written down, the agreement that is never spoken. It is the ghost in the machine of power. And we must ask, in these final, quiet moments before sleep takes us,